WisconsinEye is in the village of Brokaw in Marathon County. Why are we here? We're updating a story that began about 115 years ago when the first paper mill, symbolized by that smokestack that says Wausau Paper Mills, opened in Brokaw. That was even before Brokaw became a village and incorporated. But now the village of Brokaw is coping with the closing of the mill. The Wausau Paper Mills closed this facility, which predated the village, in 2012. And what happened? According to the Department of Revenue, the village of Brokaw lost 98% of its manufacturing value, dropping from $11.67 million in 2012 to $245,600 in equalized value in manufacturing in the village in 2013. Overall, the village of Brokaw lost 34% of its tax base in 1 year. So join us for the next edition of Newsmakers, where we will ask the Brokaw City Attorney how this village is going to cope with the loss of its economic anchor, the anchor that it had for 115 years, the debt that the village still has, and the future with the company Turex that purchased this property. WisconsinEye is in Wausau at the corporate office of Reuter Ware. We're talking to lawyer Dean Dietrich. He's the city attorney for the village of Brokaw. Mr. Dietrich, thanks for talking to WisconsinEye.
You bet, Steve. Enjoy.
Well, we were just out there at Village of Brokaw, and it strikes me that the term company town was invented for Brokaw, Wisconsin.
Well, it's an interesting comment. I don't think that originally that was the plan. But certainly the mill run by Wausau Paper at the time was a dominant piece of the village. And to some degree, many of the people that lived in the village obviously worked at the mill, and the mill acquired various parcels of land over the years.
Including Village Hall.
Including Village Hall, really because of potential claims for any type of thing in today's world. It does look like that, although it wasn't designed that way.
If you go to the village website, the historical timeline, 1899 you had the mill being built. Yeah. 3 or 4 years later, the village incorporates. So you really, and then you have the village store. And then in 1948, according to the website timeline, the company began helping Brokaw homeowners build their homes. So it's really, the fates of both the mill and the village have been intertwined.
Certainly been linked together. The dominance of that business is clear in the historical timeline. I think part of the reflection of my answer is that the residents of the village don't view themselves as just linked to the mill, and I think it's grown out of that. Certainly the mill closing several years ago has had a significant impact on where the village is going in the future, but I think the residents of the village today would say, you know, yes, that's a big part of who we were, but we want to stand up and be the village of Brokaw.
Well, you mentioned the closing of the mill. How long have you represented the village, sir?
I've actually only represented the village for about a year now.
Okay.
So it's been a lesser period of time, and I don't have all the history, although I've driven through the village for many years and certainly have some of the background.
The Department of Revenue figures on the equalized value are just striking. But 2012, manufacturing in the village, $11.67 million. 2013, $245,600, a drop of 98%. The equalized value of the village of Brokaw dropped 34% in 1 year. Are you aware of any other municipality in Wisconsin that experienced that loss in tax base, sir?
I will say this. It is somewhat unique in the sense that the community has grown up the hill, not down in the, quote, valley where the mill was. Other businesses, other communities rely upon businesses, but there hasn't been a growth of ancillary businesses around the mill, making the village predominantly relying upon the mill for its business.
What are the fiscal ramifications and the impact of this? Because let's talk first on the TIF district. Now, the TIF district was formed, I don't know when, but...
Yeah. It was, I think, formed roughly 6-7 years ago.
And the TIF district was formed to do what, sir?
The TIF district was formed actually to create a business park. I call it up the hill, but really on the west side of the highway, in order to attract more business, to diversify. Part of that development included the village acquiring some land for residential properties. And there was some success. There's a little subdivision up there next to the industrial park. But certainly that has not grown the way the way the village board members thought it would grow. It was open just prior to the 2008 downturn in the residential market. So we have a grain mill up there. Now we do have some National Guard facilities which aren't really property tax payers, but there's some small business up in that area, all of it kind of leading to the other highway that heads out of town going north up into Merrill. So the design of the tax increment district was to create kind of this industrial park that would help the village. Now, the village recently declared that industrial park distressed. What that allows it to do is to refinance the debt and to extend the time of the TID. The result of that is we believe that the TID will be self-sustaining and will not create a burden on the taxpayers of the village. In fact, we're pleased over the course of the last month, we've had some interest in other parcels in the small business park that's up there. So that particular strain on the village, we think we're going to be able to correct without a lot of negative impact.
TIDs or TIFs, we're using them interchangeably,
Yes.
correct? Okay.
Yes.
Assume some amount of bonding
Yes.
in debt, right?
Right.
Well, maybe the question to ask is how deep in debt is the Village of Brokaw?
The TID debt is roughly $3.25 million.
Okay.
And that's the cost for the infrastructure that was put in 5-8 years ago. And again, that particular debt, it will be refinanced and should be sustained and paid by the growth that we've already experienced in the valuation in that property. So it'll be refinanced with a view to being able to have a right repayment structure to make that a positive cash flow setting. The debt of the village, so-called general operation debt, GO debt, would be in roughly $800,000 to $900,000.
Okay.
Some of the cost of that is sewer and water utility costs that were not covered by the TID and are not being paid by the revenues from the sewer and water utilities. So the general operating budget of the village is paying those costs. When you think about it, that's not that bad a number.
No.
But your point of the loss of tax revenues makes it very difficult.
Well, the loss, what percentage, that paper mill paid property taxes.
Right.
So what percentage of the village budget came just from that mill?
I don't have that number that I can give to you. It was
Be more than half, do you think?
I would say less than half.
Less than
I
half.
think less than half. But in addition, the mill used the sewer and particularly the water services.
I saw one estimate in a news story that the mill was paying $10,000 a month for water.
That's probably true. Now, I'm not
Okay, excuse me.
privy to that, but that's probably true. And that's really where some of the so-called crunch comes from, because they built the facilities to be able to support that business, and now the revenue isn't coming in.
So the impact of the closing of the mill, which happened, I think, in 2012.
Right.
Right. You have the loss of the village's biggest taxpayer.
Right.
You have the loss of the tax base. You had the loss of 400 jobs.
Right.
I had a brief conversation with the village president who said when he started at the mill 35 years ago, 700 workers there, and when it ended, there were only 400. Here's my question. How much fiscal difficulty is the Village of Brokaw in as a result of circumstances beyond its control?
It's hard to characterize that in one word. The loss of revenues, both water revenue, water utility revenue, and property tax revenue, impacts the revenue side of the municipal budget. Your services are somewhat reduced, so some cost savings there, although you have to have a minimum level of services to provide to the residents. So,
Plow the streets.
right, exactly. Fix the streets, fix water main breaks, that type of thing. So there's a lot of concern. There's concern about the ability of the village residents to continue to afford high utility rates, property tax rates, to fund kind of the fundamental level of services. But the goal of the village board, the goal of us helping the village board, is to keep the village sustainable and to try and grow the village. As I said, we've had some small steps of success with a small business coming into the industrial park, and we're going to continue to try to sell some of the residential properties owned by the village to continue to grow the village. That's our goal. As it gets tough to do that, you look at other options as well.
Can we talk about some of those? In preparing for this interview, I ran into the term disincorporation, which I've never heard. Is that, number one, is that an option? Number two, what is it?
Yeah, I don't use the word disincorporation.
Oh, thank you. Let's use English.
There are two real options. Three, I guess. The first one is to continue, and as I said, that's our goal. That's what we're striving for. We're working with Marathon County to do a study of how we might better structure that whole region from a cost impact standpoint, from a service standpoint. There are two townships that are directly related to and connected to the Village of Brokaw. Certainly one option is a consolidation, some sort of a consolidation between the village and the townships.
Would that be a shotgun marriage?
Well, it certainly is something that's being looked at because of the difficulties being experienced by the village. There's been good discussions. I think that the three parties are discussing things with a very much a concern about what it may mean to each individual entity, and dissolution. And really the statute talks about dissolution, and there is a statute, never used, I don't think, in the state of Wisconsin.
That was my question. Never used?
I'm
not aware of it.
It's ever been used in the state of Wisconsin to in effect dissolve the municipal entity. It is like disincorporation. The practical effect of it is that the assets and liabilities of the entity would apply to the townships. And of course the townships are not very excited about that as an opportunity for them. So that's why we're looking at a study as to how all this may fit together the best with the large not neighbor, but close neighbor, City of Wausau? Are there opportunities there? That type of thing. It's a tribute to the village that this hasn't come up until now when you look at some of the impacts from the loss of that big business. But it's come to a point where it needs to be very much looked at.
Is dissolution a form of municipal bankruptcy?
Well, a municipality in the state of Wisconsin cannot declare bankruptcy.
Cannot.
Cannot. By operation, it's not something that's an allowable power of a municipality. Federal law comes into play, and absent something within our Constitution to make that allowable, it's really not an option. So yes, you could look at it as kind of a form of bankruptcy or a different way to handle what would be a bankruptcy option. And I've been practicing municipal law for 37 years, and yeah, it's not come up before. And you don't find people writing articles about dissolution of a municipality because it just doesn't happen.
Dissolution is clearly the village's last choice?
Correct.
Mr. Dietrich, okay.
Yeah.
The first choice is some type of a consolidation with the surrounding town?
Well, the first choice is really to make it, I want to say make it over the hump, but the hump is
rather large.
Not only rather large, I guess it's not real clear how long the hump is going to last. Ideally, if we could make sure that we are quote, cash flowing until we see growth in the region, until we see growth in the village, I mean, that would be our ideal scenario. And again, we've seen some positive steps, but as today things move slowly. I read an article early this morning about some people are suggesting the housing boom is dead, whatever little boom there was. So it's hard to project it. That's clearly the number one priority and option of the municipality.
If there was a consolidation with the two neighboring towns or just one?
Two neighboring towns.
Two neighboring towns. They would then, the new merged entity would face their debt and the Village of Brokaw's debt, right? Right.
Now, that's not been done before. So we're embarking on new territory. What happens to the debt of the TIF or TID if technically there's no sponsoring municipality? Don't know the answer to that yet. I'll figure it out, but I don't know the answer to that yet. It may very well be that some sort of a consolidation keeps the village in name in order to keep the tax increment district viable. Again, we believe it's viable now. We just have to put the final paperwork together on a refinanced debt. So ideally, if that stays together, that should take care of itself. The debts of the utilities, which are really supposed to be funded by utility revenue, is also the next step that's not clear. We may very well end up creating a water utility district and a sanitary district to fund those particular portions.
Because the existing water utility is no longer getting $10,000 a month from the mill.
Right.
So you have a reduced set of fiscal reality.
The reality is we have less revenues, but of course a lot of the cost was set up for that large amount of flow. Now some of it's flow related, so you can make adjustments in expenses, but
are the lenders here the ones that loan the TIF or TID district 3.2 and the ones that have the GO bonds of 800, 900,000? Are they calling you up saying, how is the village going to resolve this, Mr. Counselor?
I would be more accurate to say that we're working directly with them.
Okay.
That we've contacted them, we've had a number of conversations with them, continuing to have conversations with them. So it's a very positive relationship right now.
What's the next timeline for this series of decisions facing the Village of Brokaw?
Well, there's a short timeline for us to resolve the refinancing of the tax increment district, only because that's the next step in the process.
Short meaning end of the year, or within a year?
Or sooner than that. Next 2 months.
Next 2 months.
Resolve that. Then, over the course of the next 3 months, Marathon County has stepped in and has agreed to hire a consultant to look at what options exist, what is the data, what's the real data, what are the options that exist, what are the relationships that could be developed, what are the potential future structures that could be developed. That's probably going to occur over the next 3 months. We're looking to interview the consultants this week or next week and then start that process. In the meantime, the village is working very hard to ensure as best it can its cash flow needs.
So you're working with the lenders,
Right.
but there's also a pending lawsuit filed by the previous owner of the plant before. So
What happened?
does that also pose a threat to the village's fiscal security, sir?
Other than it's an expense that needs to be addressed by the village, is the first owner of the mill. We believe, we submit, and I want to make it clear that it's in litigation, we submit was inappropriately scrapping materials in the building in violation of village ordinances. That's what's in litigation. The courts granted an injunction to stop the company from the things they were doing. They have not found that there has been a violation of the ordinances. That owner has sold now to the current owner.
Yes, the one who closed the mill?
No,
No, I'm sorry. Excuse me.
It's a new business in town.
That's Terex.
That's Terex.
Their signs say they're going to open in August.
Yes, and that's a kind of a recycling business. Right. That's the second owner of the mill, and they're operating pursuant to a development agreement with the village in compliance with the village ordinances. So we're looking to grow, see that business grow, hoping it'll grow, hoping to be helpful to it. So there is litigation as it relates to the first owner of the mill, and that litigation is ongoing.
But the estimate is that Terex will only employ like 10% of the previous workforce.
Because of the nature of the business.
Yes.
And because of the startup in this region, that's true. It's, in today's world, almost impossible to get any type of business with that number of employees. So the buildings, I don't see being used again for a mill. Okay. Is kind of the bottom line, if you will, to that analysis.
And Terex bought it, and they didn't inherit any of the previous owner's debts, right? In other words, they started from day forward with Correct. None of the liabilities
Correct.
Incurred by the previous owner. Okay. Now let's take a larger view. If you were lecturing your fellow attorneys who advise Wisconsin municipalities, what would you say is the unique precedent, and what should they learn from the Village of Brokaw?
That's a very difficult question. Certainly, the obvious thought is that village planners, whoever that may be, need to be very sensitive to diversity, just as financial advisors talk about diversity. Years ago, when a business like that came to town, or as you suggest, as the town was built around that business, you know, people did what was the best they could do at the time in an era many years ago of limited businesses, you know, to help that business grow. You know, I don't know if I'd say the lesson learned is don't put all your eggs in one basket. I'd rather say that the lesson probably learned is you can never rely upon having a basket, I guess.
Especially now in these times of economic
Especially
uncertainty.
in these times of economic question marks, economic diversity and difficulties. Yeah, I mean, what is my hindsight to all of this? My hindsight, I suppose, is you got to try and diversify. You got to fight to diversify. In fact, that's what they did when they built the industrial park. So you can't, the village forefathers really were doing the right things. The question, unfortunately, became they didn't grow that diversity quick enough to prevent the significant impact from the loss of this big business.
WisconsinEye covers the Capitol, has a contract to cover both houses of the legislature. Is there anyone who is contacting lawmakers about a possible solution to this? And is there any legislative remedy that's even being discussed?
There is contact with the legislature. I'm not sure that I would say that there's a legislative remedy, because the words legislative remedy to me mean fixing the laws to prevent this from occurring. I don't know that that's exactly the tone of your question.
I'm going to use a different term.
Yeah.
Is there a rescue package being discussed in the halls of the Capitol?
I'm not sure that it's being discussed in the halls of the Capitol. There are discussions occurring.
Can you talk about some potential solutions in the Capitol?
I really can't talk about that at this point in time.
Okay. Well, in summary, you've been practicing municipal law for 37 years. You ever seen a case like this?
I've seen municipalities reeling from losses of big businesses, but I've not seen a situation where, in effect, there was one business. Years and years and years ago, I practiced in southwestern Wisconsin, and very small towns or very small, even unincorporated areas would dry up if the business in that community went away or was consolidated. But that was really just the service industry around a business. It wasn't a situation of an incorporated entity, which attracted a lot of people to the entity for relationships with the business. And I think, as you've observed, a municipality that has a wonderful natural resource, a river running through it.
Wisconsin River runs right through it.
A beautiful landing where people, can get onto the river and use the river. Highway runs right next to it. We certainly are trying to use that in this recycling business. So there's a lot of opportunities there. But certainly it's been a devastating time.
You just put on your Chamber of Commerce hat and boosterism for the Village of Brokaw.
Right.
So it's a fascinating study. And do you think, how real is the possibility that Wisconsin's dissolution law, never used, might be exercised here, sir?
No question in my mind that the goal of the village is to continue to thrive and grow. That's what I'm fighting for on their behalf. That's what the village board is fighting for. That's what we're talking to people about.
Yes. But these debts have to be, there's a repayment schedule for these debts, right?
There's a repayment schedule for the debts. We think we've addressed the major portion of it, but that doesn't make life any easier. And it's a struggle, and we're going to continue to struggle. I would like to think that dissolution is not going to happen. It's not happened before, but I acknowledge that there is a provision in the law that allows for the dissolution of an incorporated municipality.
Okay. Anything I haven't asked? Any facet of this?
No, I think
you want any PSs?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think
Okay.
we're in good shape.
Councilor Dietrich, thanks so much for talking to
Thank you.
WisconsinEye.
I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
You bet.